going to do. My understanding of what we're going to do here really is an interview format. I'm thinking of it open format, kind of like a town meeting. And I was hoping to get folks, well, of course, fellowship folks. I always assume that every one of us is psychic. That's a safe assumption, right? And I also always assume that all of us have a few doubts about that state of being, since everyone asks me if I still should be doing this when they come for a reading. Well, I want to talk about what it takes to maintain a normal life and be happy in it and be psychic at the same time. And I'll tell a few stories. Dick promised that I would tell some wonder stories, and I will. The first thing that needs to be said is, I'm not an unusual person. I bet you folks aren't either. All of us have lives to live. All of us have livings to make. All of us have family to take care of. Those are the parameters of my life too. Being psychic is important to me. I use the word psychic because everybody uses it about me. What am I really doing? I hope I'm helping people bring the soul into their lives and keep it there and find their own unique paths to walking that walk in this time and in the lives they have. That's what I'm really doing. So, heavens, look at that crowd. I know very well that there are people in this audience far more psychic than I will ever be. But we won't dwell on that. Just please believe me, I'm not claiming to be a very special person. So I'm going to tell some of the stories of how the psychic dimension peeks into the everyday. Does that happen every day for me? Yes, although I don't always notice. You remember that Paul Solomon said we all do miracles all the time, but we almost never notice. That was true. But I'll tell you a short one. Some years back when I was a school psychologist in Connecticut, I began to counsel a little boy who was of kindergarten age. And he had a disease known as horn cell disease. So although he was 7 years old, he weighed about 28 pounds and he was about that big. He did grow eventually and his mind was perfectly fine. So I saw him every week for about 5 years. We got to be really close, not surprising, eh? Now, he had an older sister who was also one of mine, I'll say that, in the early intervention unit where we dealt with severely handicapped preschoolers. Early on, I developed the conviction that she had come to guide him. I have never seen a 4-year-old with such serenity as she had. She really did have serenity. I'll tell you one thing about her. I gave her a screening test one time, and as we always do with the preschoolers, I laid out 5 blocks of different colors. And I pointed to one, it was a green one, and I said, "What color is that?" And she said, "Chartreuse, silly." She was way ahead of me. She passed on, however, about the time Stephen entered 2nd grade. So I was with Stephen until he finished 3rd grade, and then I moved to Florida. Now, horn cell disease is pretty well known. And the prediction is that children with this disease, if they make it that long, always pass before the age of 7. And I would inquire about Stephen from time to time, and he did not pass at 7. And the years went by, and I did my work here in Florida. And in fact, about 10 years went by after I left Connecticut. And one night I was asleep when he entered my bedroom in his power wheelchair with a little puff control and said, "Come with me." So I rose up and I went with him, and we went up a hill to a city. And we passed through the streets and we came to a stadium, big stadium, NFL style stadium. And he led me up to a ramp. The spectators came in through a ramp and he waved to me and he went round another way and I went into the stadium. There were about 60,000 people there. And there was a big stage in the end zone. Next thing I know, Stephen rolls out onto the big stage and begins to tell his life story to the 60,000 people who have been following him from spirit. I didn't send for that. It was a gift from him to me. And it's those unasked for gifts when I'm not sending my mind someplace that really give me the confidence to go on and a feeling that I'm probably doing the right thing. You'd be amazed, maybe you wouldn't be amazed, because I see some of your faces. How many people whose first question to me is, I do readings. Should I go on doing these readings? I'm not sure I'm doing any good. And I want to tell you about one of them. And the reading said, if you could see your face when you speak joyfully to the loved ones who are here to communicate and who love the people who come to you, you would never ask that question again, because the joy in your face heals them of their fear of dying. I'm not going to linger a whole lot on dying. Naturally, I do deal somewhat with the dying and with those who have passed. Every psychic does, I'm sure of that. And then sometimes I get the kind of call that comes at street level. I was in a bookstore, a huge bookstore in St. Petersburg. It's called Haslam's. It's very famous. And I was with my son, Simeon, and we're riffling through the stacks and the bins of books. And all of a sudden, pow, I'm having a heart attack. I think, wait a minute. I'm 50 years old. I'm not having a heart attack. So I took my pulse. My pulse was fine. I wasn't having a heart attack. So I just focused for a minute. And I saw a homeless man in the alley beside the building, hidden behind a dumpster. And I went out there and up the alley, and there beside the dumpster, out of sight, was the homeless man who was having a heart attack. So I called 911, and they came promptly and took him off to the hospital. Now, that's an example of what Paul Solomon often urged us not to do, which is to be open at random. I was open at random in the bookstore because I was trying to pick a good book by psychic means, I'm not sorry that I was open. Actually, for the many times I've been surprised, I've never had reason to be sorry. And I told someone in a reading just a few months ago, she's in my book, actually. She's the nurse with the osteosarcoma. She was worried about opening. She was worried about the terrible things she sees on television, people who open psychically. And she was told in the reading, don't worry. Don't worry, Ruth. You already have protection. You never need to fear what comes. In a later reading, I asked about that. A lot of us, when we learn to channel or meditate, invoke protection before we start. And so I asked, what does that mean, this invocation of protection? And I was told, you've meditated every day for almost 40 years. You don't have to invoke protection. You've been protected every day of your life, all day and all night. I think I'm talking to listeners who are in the same boat. We have nothing to fear by opening psychically. We know the territory and they know us. So I wanted to say that early on. And then I'll tell one short, quick story. I had come home from work. I was sitting on the grass in the backyard, and around the corner came a neighbor, older woman. She had a little white poodle, little white poodle, on a leash. And she wanted me to know that it was the poodle's 12th birthday. So I made a little fuss, and then I had this very strong impression to go in the house and get a camera. So I went in the house, and I got a Rolleiflex, and I came out, and I took a picture of the poodle. Right, and she went away. And the poodle died that night. And that picture became quite valuable to this woman. It was totally natural. There was nothing spooky about it. We did not hear the theme from the Twilight Zone. We didn't hear bells. The background didn't shimmer. It was natural. Psychic work is natural. It's part of what we are and part of what we do. And to make a big fuss about it, almost certainly a mistake. We become important in our own eyes if we do that, but we're not necessarily more important to anyone else, and certainly not more important to spirit. I made some notes on the phone this morning. Let me check them. Yes. So we're awake. We've accepted, because we've been at this a while, that we're neither special nor chosen. If you're psychic, you undoubtedly chose to be before you came here. That's how it is. I won't go on about that a whole long time. Let me tell you about someone I believe was chosen. Back in my last year of teaching at Yale, I took a Christmas vacation and I drove to New Mexico. And I was at a particular place in my life at that time when I thought, what I really need is a vision quest. Well, I didn't really, but I thought I did. So I went to New Mexico and I went into a bookstore, looked around, and the only thing I saw was Edgar Casey's volume on the book of Revelation. I don't know if you've read that. It's heavy sledding, but that's where I started. So I bought that book and I asked the man behind the counter, since he had other spiritual books, I said, is there a sacred mountain near here? And he said, well, they're all sacred mountains, but the best known is that one. And he took me outside and he pointed to a peak. And honestly, it was more than 20 miles away. You probably know that if you're in the mountains in New Mexico, you can see for 40 miles. So I drove there in my rented car. It was Chevy. Oh, I'm forgetting the name of the terrible little car that Chevy made briefly that everybody hated. The one whose name in Spanish meant no go. That's the car that I was driving in. And every time I hit a bump, pow, I'd get clobbered on top of the head. But I made my way to the mountain. I ran out of pavement about 20 miles in, so I drove in that silly car on a dirt road, getting clobbered every few feet. And I reached the mountains feeling like I'd done penance. Now, I had set myself up to have an excuse to be in New Mexico. I brought a view camera with me, the big kind with the bellows. You put the cloth over your head and you put it on a tripod. So I took the camera and the bellows and the tripod, and I got out of the car and I climbed that mountain. Well, it took a whole lot longer than I thought it was going to do, and I got up at the summit at sundown. I looked around, I could see Albuquerque about 35 miles away. I could see the street lights change. That's how clear the atmosphere was. I did have a chicken feather Army surplus mountain bag. And I thought, it's getting cool. I'm going to need this mountain bag. So I sat for a while and I meditated, but it got very cool very rapidly. And before long, it was certainly below freezing. And I tested that with a little spit, which froze before it hit the ground. So I wrapped up in that chicken feather mountain bag and I shivered all night long. Later on the weather report, I learned that it had been below zero at 6,000 feet. So yes, I did some penance. I had no visions. I tried some prayer, but honestly, I was shaking so badly, they weren't very good prayers. In the morning, I got up and dutifully made a few pictures looking around. I got back in the car and I drove. I drove west for no particular reason, and I drove for about 60 miles, and the snow began to fall. And I saw a dirt road leading off the interstate, really a dirt road that came right to the interstate. You're not supposed to see that, but there it was. So I thought that was unusual. I went up that road for about 15 miles. And then I was on the summit of another mountain, and there was a village up there. It was called Cebolleta, which is Spanish for little onions. So I pulled into Cebolleta. It's only 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but it's already getting dark. And there was a store. There were a lot of little, honestly, one-bedroom houses or one-room houses. And one little store, I went in there. I bought some aspirin because I still had a headache, and by this time, a roaring cold. And I came out of the store, and there's a Roman Catholic priest standing on the porch. He said, "What are you doing here? No one comes here." And I said, "Well," I didn't want to tell him. I said, "I came to make photographs." He said, "Well, why don't you spend the night here? Because you're going down this hill in the dark. It isn't safe." So I went over to his place, and his place was a one-room cabin, just like all the others. And he set up a fire in the wood stove, and I lay down on the floor in my sleeping bag and pretty well slept for the next 3 days and nights while I got over this cold. But I did get up occasionally. He told me his story. He had been a diocesan priest in Chicago. His name was Wilson, Father Wilson. He had retired and gotten a slot with the Diocese of Albuquerque in this village. And this village had been there since 1595. It was a penal colony for Mexico City. And the same families and the same family names were still there. And he told me how he had set up to minister to this community, which had been without a priest for many years, because the last priest who was there failed to lock up the communion wine. Somebody broke into the sanctuary, drank all the wine, cracked up a car on the way down the hill and died. So they didn't want another priest. These white men made trouble. But the bishop was able to persuade them to accept him. So he set up shop. He opened the church, beautiful little adobe church. I made his picture there. And he rang the bell and nobody came. And I said, why not? Is it the snow? He said, no, they never come. So let's go over to the meeting hall. And there was a meeting hall beside the church. And we went in there, he had a film projector set up. You remember what those were like, right? Well, he had one that must have been made in 1940. And he opened up the big round can and kids began to trickle in until we had about 20 children. And then he showed them a Ma and Pa Kettle movie. That's what he had in that film can. And he told me he had a lot of those. And since no one would come to Mass, his ministry was to the children. And he, when the movie was over, he served them all marshmallows and popcorn. They talked for a while, and everybody went home. That was his ministry. And he said, to me, he said, this is what I came to do, I guess, and I think it's working. Well, I went home, back to Connecticut. Thought about that for a while. Actually, I thought about it for about 10 years. And then I became a school psychologist with a specialty in early childhood. So it took me a while to get the message. I think it made me as happy as his ministry made him. Now, what was the psychic part of that story? Probably when I turned aside for the dirt road that entered the interstate. The rest was a setup. It had all been prepared. It didn't rely at all on my psychic abilities. Actually, I sat in the corner and laughed at Ma and Pa Kettle and blew my nose a lot. That was my contribution to that little group. I think those things happen to us all. And just as I didn't recognize it, I don't think we recognize it. We're brought to these moments, these rendezvous. They happen in the supermarket, they happen in bookstores. They happen a little less often at church, in my experience. They can happen when you're walking the dog around the block. So I told a few stories, and I have one more to tell, but I won't tell it now. I would like to hear from you. If you ever have trouble balancing your psychic life, your spiritual life, your life of the soul, which is what that word means, if you ever wonder if you're doing what you're supposed to do, or if you shouldn't be doing more, I'd like to hear your story now. I'd like you to share it with everyone, and then we'll talk. I'm just scrolling through. I don't see anybody moving their lips. Okay, there's somebody. Hooray. Your image is small on my screen, and it doesn't open pin video. That's what I have to do. Okay, I can't recognize you from here. Who are you?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
I'm Claire.
Hi, Claire.
And, I'm visiting the Fellowship of the Inner Light. My son used to be a member here. And I'm a practicing medium.
Yes.
I don't have any doubts that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. It's a very clear from the relief and the healing and the gratitude that people express after I do readings, especially when we have visitors their loved ones from the spirit side. There's a lot of healing that takes place, that they know that life is in fact continuous, and that the people that they love still love them and are very much alive and very interested in their lives and their children and their grandchildren, and that family ties go on and on. They're not just blood ties, but they're spiritual ties as well. And I often find that relatives that maybe passed before a child was born will take a special interest in that child, like a spirit guide. And it's just, it never ceases to amaze me. I feel like a witness, that I get invited into these fantastic places and I get to see the most amazing things. And I would like to ask you a question.
Please.
One thing I do, I have a nonprofit foundation that works in Haiti in a very practical sort of way. It's education, especially for girls and women. And one of the ways I fundraise for my foundation is I travel around the world, literally wherever I can get my foot in the door. And I do workshops on angels, how to work with angels, how to invite angels into your life and let them do the heavy lifting. And then afterwards I do readings, and the angel workshops are always free. I have a deal with the angels. And then afterwards, they told me, we'll take care of the business end of things. You just go. And they've always kept their promise. But afterwards I do readings and I charge, and that pays my travel expenses and brings money to Haiti. But recently I've seen such an upswing in angel activity. It's just blowing my mind. And it's just, I'm comparing notes with other psychics. Are you having a similar experience? I find that angels are just coming in like an invading army. They're just.
I don't want to say hell yes, but I am. The room is very crowded when I do a reading. You know, I'm used to seeing 3 or 4 or 5, not 40. You know, that's what we used to have in the back of the room when we did an ILC class, 40 angels. Now I'm getting them when I'm doing a reading. So there's an uptick in activity, yes. And I think, I haven't got a reading on this, but I think, well, I have got a reading on this. Many people knew COVID was coming. Many souls prepared. I think many angels have joined in to help us cope with that and probably other changes, very big and profound changes. That's just Brian Berry's uneducated guess. How's that? So yes, I'm seeing what you're seeing.
Thank you for that confirmation.
Sure.
Very unexpected appearance of the angel Gabriel, who's one of the heavy hitters, in a reading for someone. I don't even remember what the context of them, but he took us into a large hall.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I am going to take this time, since I don't see a hand going up or a mouth moving. I'll tell another story. And this one had vast import in my life. I haven't really told it very often. I did tell it once at the fellowship. When I was 18 years old, foolish in the extreme, I was a naval ROTC midshipman. I had finished my freshman year. I was on a cruise on an aircraft carrier. We went to Cuba. We went to Guantanamo Bay. This was about a month before the blockade, if you remember that. And so the sailors could go ashore for Liberty. And I was assigned to get in a 40-foot Liberty boat with a coxswain, and we're ferrying sailors back and forth to the shore. And we would park the boat at the end of this quay, and then the sailors would come trickling in, we'd fill the boat, and in we'd go. And a couple of very young Marines, just about my age, not very much older, walked past me. And as they did, one of them shouted to the other guys in the boat. He said, "Hey, I shot me a Cuban on the fence last night." So if he'd slapped me, I don't think he could have hit me harder. And at that moment, in my left ear, a very quiet voice said, this life is not for you. That's all. I turned around. Of course, there was nobody there. So I got back to Northwestern, and I spent a lot of time in the journalism library over the school year that followed, reading about Indochina, which was the war on the horizon. This is 62 now. And at the end of that 9 months of reading, I applied as a conscientious objector, and I've never looked back. It's one of the best decisions I ever made. Now, the voice didn't say, don't go. The voice didn't say, the war was wrong. The voice didn't say, get out there and stop this war. I tried to do all those things. What the voice said was, this life is not for you. So I drew a lot of wrong conclusions in the short run, but I did eventually get to the right conclusion. A life based on force, life based on enforcing the will of governments with weapons and arms, was not for me. I'm fairly sure it's not for any other psychic, too. All right, that's not what we're here to do. We're not here to force anyone to do anything. We're here to help the people who have questions they can't get answers for in the ordinary days that we have in our society as we have it. So I'm not on fire to stop the war in Vietnam. I did have to get over that. And I didn't go to Southeast Asia and try to become a missionary, but I did build a different kind of life because of that prompting. I can count on the fingers of this hand the number of times I've heard a voice ever since. As a psychologist, I'm never supposed to say that I heard a voice. Yeah, that'll get me a diagnosis and a label before you know it. But I heard it that time, and I'm very grateful. Now let's see if someone else has a contribution to make or a question to ask. I see a hand. Okay, Marie-Louise.
Go ahead. Brian,
Yes.
to start, thank you so much. Oh, there she is.
Yes.
Brian, as I told you the other day, I belong to the Aetherius Society.
Yes.
And we have a line in a prayer, which is, man's extremity is God's opportunity.
I love that.
How many of us have found that when we are in extremis, we have extraordinary visitations, what's the word I want? Visitations, visualizations, appearances, voices, all kinds of unordinary experiences. I have had many myself when I have been in extremis, and when my friends are in extremis or people I'm in contact with, I suggest to them that they look or be ready for these visions. Visions is the word I was looking for.
Yes, yes. And you can pray and meditate with them, even if they're not praying people. They usually take that kind of help. In the fellowship for many years, we've always referred to those experiences as the dark night of the soul. And most of you have probably read St. John's book, The Dark Night of the Soul. Paul set out to teach because he'd had a dark night of the soul. And he always said, and I believe he was 100% sincere, he wanted to help people so learn to listen that they would never again experience a dark night of the soul. I really think he did. We can listen without having our backs against the wall. We can. And well, it's been a long time since I've had my back against the wall, but it does happen from time to time. And then, as with most people, when you get a tremendous shock, you have to rebuild your ability to enter the silence, to meditate at all, much less get good answers. You know, we ring like cymbals when that happens, and we may ring for months or even years. And then we can't enter that receptive, peaceful, listening state. And I'm not saying, I'll just say this in passing, that peaceful and receptive state is not a drowsy or a sleepy state. You're alive. You're as alive as you would be on a long distance call to someone you loved very dearly. But you're still, and you're quiet. And of course, that is the better way. Someone else. This is a town hall meeting, folks. I may have to send a Democratic Party operative to your home if you don't speak.
If I may, Brian, you were talking about like being an accidental psychic, or in some sort of serendipitous way, you discovered that you were getting information or being inspired or having a visitation or a spirit or so coming to you. I had been calculating charts, astrological charts, for probably about 4 or 5 years. And every now and then people would say, "Oh, Stephen, wow, where did you get that? You must be a psychic." You know, I say, "Oh, no. You know, I see the positions here of Uranus, you know, with this particular aspect. That's what I'm calculating." And then sometime a little bit later, I was just, you know, looking at my chart, because, you know, any astrologer, what is your favorite chart but your own, right? And so I was looking at my chart with the idea of what is a indication of a psychic. And I looked at it and I go, my goodness, this particular person could be psychic.
Yes, could be. How long did it take you to accept that, Stephen?
Well, once that revelation came and I saw that astrologically, mathematically, that this is a high possibility, then within probably a day or two, I accepted it. And then right after that, then I started, you know, going to the spiritualist church, taking psychic development classes, and really honing something that was there the whole time, but I didn't get it until my brain got it.
See, I kind of went the other way. It took me about 14 years before those experiences were happening, and happening fairly often, before I accepted that I wasn't like a crystal radio set. Do you remember them? They picked up the strongest signal in the neighborhood. You couldn't tune them. It took me quite a while to accept that, yes, this was something I chose to be. And no, I'm not like the prophets in the Old Testament. I was not sent by God to be this. It was my choice. So how long did I do this before I began to enjoy it? Honestly, 13 years. I didn't begin to enjoy it until I went on the road with Inner Light Consciousness. Then I began to enjoy it. I thought it was a very, very heavy responsibility. It is a responsibility, but it isn't heavy. And I know that I'm talking to people who know just how light the reception of psychic material is. Sometimes you can't take yourself seriously because it comes so easily. And we pray so lightly when we seek it. That's still news in Hollywood. I know that. They have people making terrible faces and sweating and grimacing. That's not how it is. When I do this, I'm never happier than when I do this. Right? And the same thing goes, and I know that many of you know this, for healing. It's done so lightly. It's done so lightly that frequently the people you're hearing healing don't notice. And you have to accept that after a while too, because they'd only get upset, you know. Or worse yet, they'd say, I want to follow you. That's no good either. So I'm looking for another contributor now in my town hall meeting. Someone's moving. Okay, your name is Becker, but I don't know your face.
No, it's Nancy, and I used to go to the Fellowship of the Inner Light, but then I moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and now I'm currently in New Bern, North Carolina. And
Okay.
Dick and I used to work together in hospice, and he let me know that you were coming because I used to go and listen to you at the Fellowship of the Inner Light. But I'm not, I don't believe that I'm psychic. I mean, I guess I could be, but I just have been led, I think, you know, during my lifetime. And the first experience that was pretty profound was I was in a head-on collision where I went through a windshield, and I was in a coma for a little bit. And then I, you know, had that big white kind of cloud light. And then I just heard a really, you know, male voice say, "It's not your time." And then I like woke up,
Message to
and then
begin.
of course, yeah, and then my mom was there, and of course, very grateful because she had been panicking I wasn't going to come out of it. And then another interesting story that had happened was I was driving from my dad's home because I was taking care of him. He had Parkinson's, and I had to drive about an hour and a half to get to my home back in Alexandria, Minnesota, because I'm originally from Minnesota. And when I was driving and just about ready to enter the freeway, my engine fell down, broke down, and my steering wheel literally was not working. And I was able to just kind of get into the meridian of the grass. And I didn't know how in the heck I was going to get out of there, get home with an engine down on the ground because the casing broke. And the craziest thing happened. My sister, who lives the opposite direction in Minneapolis, was coming from the direction where I was trying to go to. And then she said, "Oh my gosh," to her friend, "that's my sister Nancy." And she pulled up, and it was a cold winter day. And so she was able to pick me up and bring me to my dad and make those arrangements. And it was very weird that at that exact moment in time, my sister, who's 2 hours the other direction, was coming in the direction I was going.
Yes. So we were talking earlier about angels. They work so hard to make these things happen. They really do. I have eventually learned to stop and thank them when I realized that this life, which today feels like a dream, is something the angels put together. I'm not so advanced that I can do that when on street level, it's a big problem, right? If I have a collision in my car, I don't think of the angels first and similar things, but they do arrange those collisions sometimes. They do arrange those illnesses. They do arrange almost anything to stop us in our tracks and cause us to listen and recognize that we're not alone. And no one is alone. And everyone gets these, I guess I'll call them prompts. And in almost every case, you don't know what it means. And you're not supposed to know what it means. You recognize that something in your life has changed, and you begin to listen for what it is. Okay, and I always use this example. St. Paul on the road to Damascus was struck blind. Oh, I don't know if it was a donkey or a horse. If you read that, you discover it took him quite a while to realize why and what was going on. And he had a voice in everything, okay? Why do you kick so hard against the pricks is how it's written in the King James Version. Well, the things that get said to us in those moments, we don't understand. They're too profound. They're not where our head is. And, well, most of you probably know this. I really learned to be able to speak what I hear by interpreting dreams. So Stephen spent that time with astrological charts. I spent that time with dreams. I wrote 20,000 dreams down before I recognized that I was being trained. Not trained to interpret symbols, trained to hear. I see the images in the dream, but I hear their meaning, not in words. The words come out of my mouth. And that's how it is with us. And I mean all of us who are psychic, and I mean everybody on this call. It takes a little time to build that skill. I took 20 years, but I'm slower than most. But a lot of people spend all their lives longing for those experiences. And the best way to have them is to join a group where you can share them and laugh a lot and have donuts and tea. Keep it light. You will not be thrown off a horse on the road to Damascus, but there's some things you need to know. We all need to know. Do I hear things, for example, about my grandchildren? Absolutely. And I love them. So I don't always accept them with grace. You know, if I'm being told something I don't want to hear, well, I have to be told 2 or 3 times. That probably won't go away as long as I have a body, or at least as long as I read the newspaper and tune into street level life on this planet. And that's worth mentioning, street level life on this planet. Part of COVID, part of what we're all in the middle of, is a decline in Western civilization. I don't know why. I don't know what else is going to come. But all we have to do is look at the way people are treating each other in the name of politics to recognize that bad stuff is going on. And all of us need to stay serene and honestly happy and be well fed in our meditations, not be embarrassed to say I need to be fed today. I read the newspaper and I'm sorry I did because somebody has shot up a church. Those things hurt us. They diminish our attunement. So, am I saying don't read the newspaper? I'm saying read it less. Okay. And I've been trying to persuade my wife not to go to bed with CNN for about 12 years now, but maybe we're getting there. She does use earphones. But that's the last thing I want to do, is go to bed with CNN. I don't always go to bed with a question needing answers. Sometimes I go to bed with the desire to experience a state of being that will be utterly relaxed and totally joyful and have me wake up in the morning open to the beautiful day that is commencing as I wake up. I think that is not just legitimate. I think that's very necessary. We often forget to ask for ourselves. And of course, we have loved ones and spouses especially whom we'd like to reform and redo. And we worry about that. We put a lot of energy into it, and it isn't lost energy exactly, but it usually is backwards. If we put that same energy into, okay, I married an alcoholic, help me enjoy this person. I'm serious, that's a good prayer.
Who's that?
We're having some company arrive here. That's a good time for someone else to speak or ask a question. Now, somebody had a question that got blitzed out. Claire, are you still there, Claire?
She's dirty.
Where's she dirty?
I see you moving.
I'm running through the bushes and the trees. Where's the-
Okay, I see Claire's neighbors moving. Okay, I think Bruce is right there in the sanctuary. We'll give him a minute to get Claire onto the audio.
In the meantime, if I may,
Please.
you're talking, a lot about, everyday spiritual, psychic sorts of things, or how it may sneak up on us, and wonderful ways that we encounter it in the world. A curiosity about how you work and your specific psychic readings. Do you tune in to, let's say, your own spirit guide, or the spirit guide, or the higher self of whomever you're reading for? Is there a particular methodology for you to tune in? Because I'm curious about how you work.
I go up the terraces. I have a conductor take me up most of the time. The same terraces all of us ILC persons use. And I know very well that I'm invoking the presence of my higher self and the presence of my subject's higher self as well. And I do invite witnesses in every case. I don't always get them. So that's a 6 or 7 minute prelude to every reading that I do. Um, It eases my restless mind. When I go into the temple, I truly don't know what I'm going to encounter. I don't. When I open a record, I have no idea what I'm going to meet unless I get a hint. Sometimes I'll get a hint. I did a reading a while back. I walked out in the backyard, which is a bit of a jungle. I'm in Florida, but we don't water, we mow the weeds. Consequently, we get this extraordinary variety of flowers. I walked out in the yard. I was going to do a reading that afternoon, and I looked down at my feet. There were hundreds of tiny blossoms. There were blue and lavender and yellow and pink, and the biggest one was smaller than a pencil eraser. I was utterly taken by it. And I just stood there and I took it in. Later that day, I did a reading for a person, and the record keeper handed me the book, and there on the cover were those same blossoms. And I was just as thrilled to see them in that situation as I had been in the backyard. So I do the terraces in the temple. Those of you who have done them for a while know. Yes, we want to go to the temple, especially if we're going to heal or we're going to pray. But I don't always go to the temple to pray. And I don't always go to the temple to heal. It's not practical sometimes. But that's the heart of my method. I don't do anything I didn't learn in ILC. Although I get some surprises sometimes. One of the things, for example, Paul has asked you, well, if you want to talk to a person who's passed, why do you want to hear from Uncle Harry? He wasn't so wise when he was alive. Well, I think that's a slander. We continue growing after we pass. Uncle Harry may be quite a different persona now. So I don't close the door on Uncle Harry. I don't close the door even in my own expectations. And some of the loveliest things that have happened to me in the reading situation have been visits from relatives who have passed, and occasionally relatives who have not passed but happen to be on some other continent. They turn up in my reading room, and I just flow with it. And it means a lot to the people who come for the readings. And I mentioned this in the book more than once. If that's a person really paying a heavy toll to drugs, or alcohol, or some other substance, they come, often bathed in guilt. Sometimes my reading room has 5 windows. It's shaped like a bay. Sometimes they sit outside the window. They're ashamed to come in to what they're seeing as sacred ground. But they speak, and we transmit what they say. So if Uncle Harry turns up in that situation, he's welcome in my reading. Because we grow. We continue to grow. Now, I don't want to go into this because I'll use a heavy word. My mother was a mentally ill person. Her life was tumultuous, and she passed away. And about 5 years after she passed, I was getting up in the morning. I was about to go. I was serving an inner city middle school at that time, a school that was about 80% Black and 90% free and reduced lunch, which is to say, poor. It was Monday morning, and I was dragging. I had heard on the news last night that there had been a shooting in the neighborhood of the school, and that 3 people were dead. A young man who had broken up with his girlfriend, she dumped him, sneaked up on the girlfriend and another boy she was with in the back seat of a car and shot all 3 of them to death. Well, I knew the girl. I didn't know the 2 boys. I didn't want to go to school. I knew just how heavy it was going to be. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm calling in sick today. This is not my job. Someone else can handle this one. Because it's really terrible. You get into a middle school classroom. What do? First thing, they start finding out who's related to whom so they know who to root for. Terrible, but true. I didn't want to go through that stuff, especially with this one girl. So I sat there, and I hadn't thought of this for years, but locked up in another room, something I never thought about. I had a pistol, and it was loaded. For the first time in my life ever, that pistol looked pretty good to me. And I'm sitting there saying, I know better. I remember other lives when I left this way. I'm not doing that again. And then I heard a laugh behind me. And it was my mother's laugh. The way she used to laugh when I was a young child before a mental illness took a toll on her voice. And she said, you're going to be all right. Just love them. That's what she used to say when she went to work in the hospital. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to just love them. She was an RN. And it lifted the whole load. So I got up and I went to school and got rid of the pistol shortly after. Literally, it was sitting in there. I quite forgotten that I had it. Now, I suppose I could have gotten that help from an angel. But it also told me that she is healed. She's not a schizophrenic anymore. A year later, I was in Houston visiting my sister, my age, a little older. One of her daughters was there with two of her children. And they had been kicking a soccer ball in the backyard. And one of the children came in right in. He was holding his mouth because the soccer ball had hit him right in the lips. And he sat down and he made a face, put his tongue between his lips, and he lowered his eyes, and my sister and I both gasped. That was the face my mother made when she was in pain. And we both recognized it instantly. And she looked at me, I didn't say a word, and she said, he's his own little guy. Don't you say a word. Because it's my mother reincarnated as her own grandson, which was like getting a letter from home, really. It was lovely. And an interesting thing, for most of her career, she was a specialist in heart surgery. And she was scrub nurse for Michael DeBakey, an open heart surgeon. This boy was born with Kawasaki syndrome. That's a heart syndrome. And by chance, of course it was chance, his parents had moved almost next door to the Jehovah's Witnesses hospital somewhere in California, where dwelt America's foremost specialist in Kawasaki syndrome. He was very well cared for, and he's flourishing today as a 14-year-old. And honestly, I think my mother's on the case. Or her connections are. Those people that we see when we do a reading, the people we dream about, if we're dreaming about them, they're trying to work with us. Always trying to heal us, even if they scare us, even if we didn't like them so much when they were still with us. They always come with good motives for a good reason. And so that's a very good reason when you have a dream about an unpleasant person you would not have wanted to see, to get up and pray for them. Pray that they grow where they are, that they find happiness where they are, that it has every bit as much meaning as the days they had when they were, quote, alive, as if they're not still alive. Of course they're still alive. Most of them, as far as I can tell, aren't very different from us. They may have a different set of concerns and a different daily schedule. Most of the ones I see are in school. They're training with their soul groups. Now, I'm not going to embarrass somebody in this group. Friday I did a reading for a person 1 year older than me, who had been an infant in England during the war. And although she lived in a city which apparently was not heavily bombed, some of the members of her soul group lived in cities that were heavily bombed. And so I asked her to take me seriously and go to East End of London and to Birmingham and to Plymouth and go into the areas that had once been destroyed and pray for those people who suffered and died as infants in those bombings, because they were among her soul group. They trained with her on the other side before they came here. And they're still feeling the pain of their passing under those horrible circumstances. Now, I'm not using the word stuck. You hear that word a lot when you pray for people who have passed. I don't know that they're stuck. I just know that they're still in pain. So, and then I had to ask her to take me seriously, but it's all right. I laugh just as much when I'm doing a reading as I do any other time. So people don't always take me seriously. And of course, every word is gold. Can I hear some more from you folks? Jill is licking her lips. She's about to speak. No. Ah. Someone is speaking. I can't see, the image isn't clear enough for me to know who that is. Oh, that's Dick.
Oh.
I'm not used to you with a beard yet, Dick. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
All right. Usually I just rely on my intuition and I may get a feeling or an idea from that and I'll just follow it. If I get the idea, I feel it's from spirit and I'll follow it. But there were two times in my life that I heard a voice, only two. One time I was trying to sell a house in West Virginia and my grandsons had punched holes in the walls in the hallway and I was trying to fix up the house. And I was trying to patch up that hole and make it smooth, and I could not do it. And a voice said, wet it. So I got a pan of water and a washcloth, and I wet the plaster on the wall. And then when I used a board with sandpaper, it came out perfect. Wasn't a big thing, but it met my needs. The second time was in the same house. I was getting ready to go on vacation, and we would always go to an island off the coast of Maine where I'd row a dory. The dory was in the family's possession, but they didn't have oars. I had the oars, but the oars were over the rafters in my garage in West Virginia, and I had forgotten to put them in the van. So as I was packing, I heard the voice said, the oars. So I got the oars, put them in the top of the van and took them to Maine. And I rowed that dory around the island. And as I was rowing the dory, a bald eagle flew over my head. It made my day.
I'll bet it did. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I did once as a child hear a voice. I was out in the yard with three other guys and we were throwing a ball back and forth. It was getting serious and I didn't have a baseball glove on. So I ran into the house to get the glove. And as you might expect, I had to crawl under the bed to get it because that's where it was. And then one of the boys outside shouted, Brian, come here. And a voice said, don't go. I'm thinking, there's nobody under this bed with me. And I don't recognize that voice. It came again, don't go. I didn't listen. I grabbed that glove and I ran out and I ran with these guys. They had hollered to me because a helicopter flying overhead had gone down, only a block away. We all ran over there. I've never been sorrier I did something in my life. We ran into the backyard coming from the alley where the helicopter was burning and three men were dying before our eyes in the middle of the flames. And I vomited for 3 days and nights. Much later, I recovered my death in World War II in the crash of a multi-engine plane in the flames, precisely like that. But somebody tried to save me from that experience. I wasn't listening very well at the age of 11. I listen better now at 77. I hope.
Well, I do have an example of voices, I suppose. I was working at a job I really hated, and but I felt with life circumstances I couldn't leave it. And one day I was walking across the warehouse floor and I heard, it'll be okay. I'm like, all right. Well then, I don't know, years and years later, I'm working with an energy kinesiologist, working our way back in time to a traumatic event. And we went to that time, and I'm telling myself in the meditative state that everything will work out, that it did work out. And I realized later that that was my own voice telling my younger self that I was going to be okay.
I love that. You know,
Yeah.
time is very flexible, isn't it?
It is.
Yes,
It
it
is.
really is. I love that. I really do. Although Jill knows better than anybody, time's a little too flexible for me at street level. I miss appointments. I forget to return
Yeah.
calls. I do all that stuff almost every day. But if that's the price I pay for being able to jump around in time, I guess I'm glad to pay it.
Yeah.
And those are the things that embarrass psychics, isn't it? Those little human things we think of as faults and deficiencies, which actually are the other side of some of the talents that we have. I had a phone message this morning from a woman I know, a fellowship woman, and she messaged me to say that her granddaughter, 25, 2 children, has been having a lot of trouble with ghosts in her home. They're slamming doors, they're calling out in the night, they're frightening children. Is there going to be anything that I could do to help? Well, I've done one exorcism in my life and I fell into it. I didn't set out to do it. And this person is way out in the Midwest. So I'm not going to do an exorcism, but I am going to pray for whoever or whatever that is. I did get the address, and I think I'm going to share that address with you. We'll see if we all can pray, because that's a soul that needs to go to rest. Okay, here we are. The address. This mother's name. Margaret. I won't tell you her last name. I don't have permission to do this. But she's asked for help, so I'd like us all to close our eyes now and enter the consciousness we use when we pray. Pray for Margaret and her 3 children in that house on Orange Street in Knoxville, Iowa. And pray for all who are in that house, in the body or out of the body, alive in this life or not in this life. And let's say to that person, there's a good life ahead for you. You don't have to be in this house. You don't have to be unhappy if you are unhappy. There's happiness ahead. We know this. We've all been there. So look around. We're sending someone to come and get you. Probably an angel, can't say for sure. But they will be radiant with light. It will take your hands. You'll feel the love. You'll feel the light. Say yes. Go with them. What you're doing now isn't helping anyone. Let's go and move on, get started on a new way of being. It will be good. It will work out, I promise. And now I'm just going to see light over that house and Margaret and the 3 children. 2 are twins and one's a singleton. The oldest is 5, the twins are 5, and the young one is 3. And I want to bless them all. Dwell in a happy home, that they make happy lives, that they love their mother, that they draw out the best that can be had from the childhood they're living, that they learn from this experience to seek within for the help we all have available, we all deserve, and we all need. so let it be. Thank you and amen. Okay. All right. Someone has joined us. Irene. Hello.
Hello.
You kind of at the end.
Thank you very much for that. That was quite lovely. I was wondering why I was here today. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Dick sent me an email last night saying that you would be speaking today, and I didn't know who you were or what you would be speaking about, but out of my relationship with Dick, here I am.
Okay, wonderful. I'm glad you're here. And there may be a reason, eh? So you have to listen to the recording when Dick posts it and see if there's something more for you. And if you see my old friend, Bruce Demling, on the streets of Charlottesville, tell him Brian Berry says hi, and I'll be in touch. Bruce
Demling.
Yes. He's a retired professor at the university. I saw a hand go up. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Some of my spirit connection seems to be in the form of telekinesis.
Mhm.
And my father, who was an aerospace engineer at NASA, had a friend who was a psychic, and he would travel down to Mexico and do experiments with him. This is about the time I was in high school. He'd be about 110 if you were alive today. So my father and I didn't communicate a lot when I was a teenager, but he did, if something failed, then I would hear about it. You know, I'd hear the complaint. I didn't hear about a lot of his successes. But one day he was complaining about how he used to be able to turn a pinwheel with his mind for a week, and he was frustrated because he couldn't do it anymore. So I know he did a lot of thought experiments with telekinesis with his psychic friend in Mexico. And after he passed away, things began to manifest around me. You know, quite a powerful mind in life. And so I guess it just kept manifesting as he chose. And in one place I lived shortly after he passed away, I would wake up in the middle of the night and my bed would be rocking back and forth. And it was a bit startling, but each time I managed to go back to sleep. It happened 3 times in one night. Then I thought, you know, is my house shifting? You know, what is going on? So I put a glass of water on my nightstand and a flashlight next to me. And I woke up in the night again and I felt the bed shaking. And I turned the flashlight on the water and the water was still. So I thought, okay, it's not the whole house. You know, it's not my room, it's got to be the bed. And the third night, I wasn't even asleep yet. I was just kind of drifting around in my mind, but definitely not asleep. And it started shaking again and rocking back and forth. And I just said out loud, you know, whoever you are, if you're trying to communicate with me or sparing me, can you please try to find some other way to communicate with me? And it stopped, and that didn't happen again. But then not long after that, when I would walk into a room, the ceiling fan would turn on. And I saw that as the pinwheel experiment. That seemed pretty obvious to me. It would usually be when I was in a state of extremis that I would find it on. But one day, I had been looking him up on the internet. He actually wrote a book in terms of physics about the phenomena associated with UFOs. He had had a couple of sightings himself while he was a division chief at NASA, and he became one of their sort of clearinghouses of information on people who had sightings, their pilots and things like that. So I moved from the house where the ceiling fans were turning on into the condo where I live today. And then for a while, the interior locks, the doors with locks on them, and the inside of my condo would lock. And I would just have to sort of carry a paper clip with me and pop the locks. And I'm the only one that lives there with my cats. And so usually it was a room where I keep a lot of African tribal art. I work with African refugees. And so whenever I wanted to go in there, I would just have to be prepared to unlock the door. And one day, I went to open the hot water heater closet and it was locked. And I opened it and I had some water jugs stored on a shelf there. And one of them had been crushed. And the water had leaked all over the shelves. I didn't understand how something could be crushed like that. Anyway, and I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing I was going to say about his book in UFOs. I had been looking him up on the internet, going back to that story, and I got up from looking at him on the computer about people talking about his book in all different languages from around the world, different pages. And I walked into my living room, and for the first time, the ceiling fan went from dead still and it turned on to full blast, full speed. And I said, why would you be turning on now? Because I'm not upset about anything. And I went, wait a minute, I was just looking you up on the internet. I get it. And as soon as I said, I get it, I heard it clicked and it turned off. So I think he's kind of around, you know, just to let me know he's there and looking out after me. And
Will you tell me the name of his book?
Conventional flying objects. NASA engineer says how UFOs work. It's about UFO propulsion systems, potential propulsion systems.
Is there anything you can do to teach or explain or make that book more widely known?
Well, it's available on Amazon. I haven't ever made a website for it, and I've thought about that a long time. I don't have the personal talent to do it, but I've thought of hiring somebody to do it.
I think that would be a very good idea.
Thank
And
you.
I want to say something about this. There are not many things we can talk about that are as likely to draw ridicule as aliens and flying saucers. I know very well, many of us have those experiences.
He's one of the scientists that can
I'm
validate.
sorry. I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
One of the scientists that can validate it. When he had his first sighting, it was seen by many other people, including my mother. It was during what's called a flap in our area. There are a group of sightings over a period of weeks. And the plane spotters, this is back in the mid-50s, there were plane spotters. And
Yes.
none of them reported seeing anything unusual, but he actually went to their homes and interviewed them, and they all saw it. There were 4 craft.
They just knew better than report, eh?
Right, they were told not to put anything in their reports. And then he contacted someone that worked on radar at Fort Monroe, who had tracked him on radar, and he contacted an Air Force pilot who was already in the air and sighted them. And that pilot was from Langley.
Well, at the risk of going out on a limb, which I almost never mind doing, you may have something to learn from, something to do for or with some of these events. And if you can open yourself to that possibility, I don't think you will regret it. I'm not trying to appoint you their ambassador. No, that's their job. But so many of us have seen these things. My brother was a naval aviator. He saw them. And I said, well, what happened when you reported it? And he said, I'm not crazy. I didn't report it. And all the other officers in the room said exactly the same thing. So that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it, when I was teaching at an art school in New Haven, Connecticut, the students used to take picnics up to Bantam Lake, the northwest corner of Connecticut, because if they stayed after sundown, they would see flying saucers come and soak up electricity from the power stations up there. And I'm not going to argue that they didn't see it. There must have been 40 of them who saw it. Well, anyway, and I'm going to let you all go because we've kept you quite a while, and it's a Sunday. But I love this, and I hope we can do it again and maybe set a topic or two before we do it. Nobody really wants to listen to me tell stories. I'm just trying to prime the pump. The way psychic events occur in our lives, it's always unexpected. And it's always something that, if we spoke about it too freely, would invite ridicule. Well, it won't happen here. Today, this group feels exactly like the groups we used to have at the end of the evening after an inner light consciousness class. These stories would tumble out, and people would tell these very meaningful things which they didn't yet understand, because we don't understand when they happen. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Gosh, I've enjoyed meeting a number of you, getting to see you again. Oh boy.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
And Dick and Stephen, thank you for the work you did.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, and God bless us all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.